learning how to speak the Chinese language with tones, with a very different set of vocabulary, and having to learn hundreds or thousands of Chinese characters on top of that from the very beginning, for a lot of people, it's just overload. It's just too much. In context of Taiwan, I think the biggest problem that the startup community has here is that it's, for lack of a better term, too Taiwan focused. As in the kind of the vision, the scale is just for the island and not beyond. Startups want to be unicorns, they have to go global.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
What's up, what's down, what's going on around? This is Startup Taiwan Foreigner's Business Guide. I'm Paolo Leasing, founder at MillionDC.com, an educational platform for entrepreneurs in developing countries. This YouTube channel and podcast are offshoot of my book, Startup Taiwan Foreigner's Business Guide. This channel will find answers to your questions about starting a business in Taiwan, so leave those questions in the comment section below. Enough about me, let me introduce our guest. Jamie Rufe is from the US. He's the founder and CEO of Warp Speed Chinese, a 6-month program for Taiwan-based professionals and expats. Jamie is a professional Chinese language coach based in Taiwan. With 15 years of Mandarin Chinese experience, he has lived and worked in the Chinese-speaking world for the past 10 years, 3 years in China and 8 years in Taiwan. His unique teaching method ignores learning Chinese characters and focuses entirely on the spoken language. It combines cloud-based language training, one-on-one coaching, drip-fed vocabulary learning, frequent speaking practice, and real-time language feedback, ensuring that his clients make as much progress as they can during the 6-month period. Jamie is an active moderator of a startup community, Taipei Impact Entrepreneurs. His last corporate job was as executive assistant to the chairman and CEO of Foxconn, Terry Guo. Jamie graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a Bachelor of Science in East Asian Languages, Literature, and Linguistics. Jamie, welcome to the show. First question, how did you get to Taiwan? What brought you here?
Okay. I came to Taiwan kind of by accident. Before coming here in 2013, I'd been living in China, specifically Shenzhen, for 2.5 years. And the company I was working for then moved me here to Hsinchu.
Before we move on to questions related to Chinese language, I want to know, why are you visible in the Taiwan startup ecosystem?
So starting in December of last year, I started getting involved, participating in events for the Taipei Impact Entrepreneur Group, and have since then become an administrator in the group, in particular helping out a lot in the Facebook group.
And in the previous interviews that we've had here, most of them would say that we need to have a Taiwanese co-founder or a Taiwanese friend to help them navigate through the rules and regulations about starting a business in Taiwan. Would you say that's necessary?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, and I think regardless whether you're starting a business or Taiwan, in any country where you're a foreigner, I think it just makes sense to have a local partner or a local friend to help you through that process, because they might be savvy to information, laws, procedures that you don't understand. And it doesn't matter how good your Chinese is or that language of that country. I just think having that type of local inside information, domain knowledge, you won't be able to get by yourself.
I've been here in Taiwan for like 10 years now, more than 10 years, and I was able to get by without really studying Chinese language. How would you convince me to go back and study the language?
This is kind of like an objection or something that I've heard in the past from some people, because yes, learning Chinese is very difficult and challenging, and sometimes it's a long-term process, and you might not immediately see the benefits. But I think if you're doing business in any country, I think there's a big thing is that intangible element. It's the element of connection, of showing that you actually care about, and for example, you're starting a business in Taiwan. It shows that you care about this place. I've heard so many stories. I've had so many conversations with people who've been living here 5 years, 10 years, even longer, who don't speak the language, and quite often a lot of the similar words come up, like, I feel embarrassed or ashamed about that. Like, I feel like if I'm going to live here for the rest of my life, for some people, I feel like I should really know the local language.
I agree with you. Plus the fact that somehow I feel isolated or I feel like I live in my own bubble, that I couldn't really get into what's going on around me except for the little Chinese that I know and I could understand. For example, as simple as knowing what's in the news related to coronavirus, I would even need to Google Translate like how many cases we have on a daily basis. Is it from abroad or is it locally? So in a way, I get what you're saying. I couldn't fully immerse myself in Taiwan without the language. So I guess you were able to convince me, especially if my plan is to stay in Taiwan for the longer term. What interests me with your program is that you don't actually teach yet how to read Chinese characters. You jump straight into speaking the language. Could you explain a little bit more why?
Yes, I actually think this is probably one of the most important and powerful strategic changes or tweaks that I've made to my system, my approach, that I think is a game changer for a lot of people. I think one of the biggest myths, and it's just, it doesn't matter where you take Chinese, whether it be at a local Mandarin training center, with a tutor, with a textbook, whatever, basically everyone will have you learning characters from the beginning. And from my experience and just from talking with a lot of different people, for a lot of people, this is a recipe for failure, because learning how to speak the Chinese language with tones, with a very different set of vocabulary, and having to learn hundreds or thousands of Chinese characters on top of that from the very beginning, for a lot of people, it's just overload. It's just too much. For some people, it's like learning 2 languages at once, so it just bogs down your progress. So by postponing that, learning the characters, learning how to read and write later in the process, and it's not even that far down the line, maybe 6 months down, you just set yourself up for success.
Yeah, that's the follow-up question that I want to ask. So after 6 months of getting familiar with it, then you also teach them how to read Chinese characters. Is this correct?
Right. At this stage in my business, and I guess you could say my startup, I'm still focusing on my core 6-month program right now. But yes, I guess you could say I'm kind of brainstorming strategies for that next stage in terms of learning how to read and write.
I want to go back to the other role of being one of the key admins of Taipei Impact Entrepreneurs, and I think you're really visible. You provide a lot of tips on how entrepreneurs could improve their way of doing business. Especially, you came from a really good school. Can you think of any problems or concerns about the Taiwan startup ecosystem that probably we could improve on based on your interactions with the founders here?
This is something that I actually learned a few years ago when I was at Foxconn, where I had the opportunity we'll be talking about it, I guess, a little bit later, but the opportunity to attend a lot of meetings with different startup founders, both in China, in Taiwan, and also in the US. But in particular, in context of Taiwan, I think the biggest problem that the startup community has here is that it's, for lack of a better term, too Taiwan focused. As in the kind of the vision, the scale is just for the island and not beyond. Whereas if you look at another famous small country well known for its startup ecosystem, Israel. Basically, what I've heard from there is that basically most of the startups, their immediate vision is global, because they know that the domestic market is not big enough. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, it depends what your goal and vision is, but for most companies, especially startups or want to be unicorns, they have to go global. And I think for the Taiwan startup scene, there's not enough of that yet. That's my feeling.
You talk about Terry Guo, and in our introduction, we mentioned that you actually work with him, like you actually fly to different meetings with Terry Guo. How is it working with him? Could you share some insights on about him that entrepreneurs could pick up and learn from him?
Absolutely. So I think a lot of people know about Terry right now, but a lot of people don't know about his story as I guess you could say, like as a startup entrepreneur back in the 70s and 80s. The one story that I always found so incredible was back in the 80s, he took a 11-month road trip in the US with a local guy, just driving around 11 months, where I don't think he spoke much English back then, and he would literally walk into prospects' offices and walk out with orders somehow. There were many times where he would be walked out by security, but somehow that's kind of this epic story of how he kind of started building up Foxconn, especially in the U.S. market back in that day. And I hear that and I just like shudder at the thought. I'm like, oh my gosh, like 11 months, almost a year, just on a road trip trying to build business, trying to get orders. So probably the biggest thing I learned working from Terry, observing him being at his side for literally sometimes 14, 16, 18 hours a day for 2 years, was what you can achieve if you focus on one thing nonstop for a very long period of time and just stick to it and never give up and just work your butt off, what you can achieve.
Could you say the same thing with learning the Chinese language?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is the thing that I talk with, like when I'm on sales calls with potential students, this is something I talk about a lot, which is for busy professionals who are learning Chinese, for most of them, learning Chinese will not be the first priority. Of course, their number one priority is still going to be their business, their work, their careers, their family. So in context of that, how can we set them up with a routine that still treats learning Chinese, like they come to me because they want to do it. They want to start speaking it. How can we help them? How can I help them get there? So we have to make it a priority somehow. And by doing that, we look at their calendar and actually they need to protect it like any other appointment.
I know you have your own YouTube channel, and we will post that link in the description below. But could you give some of our foreigners audience, like especially those who don't have like an idea of Chinese language, some tips on how they could begin learning this language?
I think two strategic, because there's so many. I think there's too many tips to kind of in terms of the amount of time we have right now. But I think two strategic considerations that will make learning Chinese way easier and way more enjoyable for you is number one, don't learn characters in the beginning. Focus on pinyin, focus on the spoken language first. Get comfortable with the spoken language first, build that foundation of your initial vocabulary, and then number two, before you dive into learning the language and like trying to learn a lot of sentences and phrases, make sure you gain a general mastery, proficiency in the sounds and the tones. If you do those two things, you're setting yourself up for success learning Chinese.
Sorry, I need to pull it back to your role as, I'm jumping back and forth, especially with your role in the Taipei Impact Entrepreneurs. Are there any overall concerns or problems that they are telling you in terms of running their own startup here in Taiwan?
I think, especially on the Facebook group for Taipei Impact Entrepreneurs, the most common questions and concerns that we see are just a handful. And especially in this age of COVID and this global pandemic, I think the number one is visas.
Okay.
Either how to stay in Taiwan because your visa is about to run out, or how to get into Taiwan. Those two things. So we quite often get questions about the entrepreneur visa, about the gold visa. Other than that, infrastructure. Like how do you register your business? How do you register an address? How do you get the resources you need? How do you get an accountant? Those are probably the most common ones.
And I guess the benefit of being in that group is that you get answers directly as opposed to working with agencies. Of course, you don't get like the full answers, but at least you get some answers to your questions, especially if it's another founder sharing his input about or his own experience about the same topic that another founder has a problem with.
Yes. I think one of the really cool things about our group right now is that we have a really cool mix of very experienced, mature entrepreneurs who have been doing business here for years, so they kind of know the ins and outs of everything. And then we have kind of people I like to call like entrepreneur curious. They're curious. They aspire to be entrepreneurs, but maybe they haven't found an idea that they've really kind of stuck to. But so there's just a lot of information and resources and people there that you can find the answers you need to those important questions.
Okay, I have let's play a quick round here. I have some basically. You have to tell me what comes to your mind. So this is just to.
Oh boy, I'm not good at these.
Maybe you are. So let me see. What is your daily breakfast?
I usually don't eat breakfast. I just have a coffee.
What show are you currently watching on Netflix?
My wife and I have been on a Korean drama binge for the past few months, so I can't think of that.
Startup? Did you watch?
We watched Startup. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you a morning or night person?
Probably a morning person.
Are you an Android or iOS user?
Apple fanboy right here.
So the answer to the next question, Mac or PC, is Mac for you. Favorite games or game if you play games?
I'm super into board games, so probably my favorite one is called Spirit Island.
Favorite movie of all time?
Oh. Off the top of my head, it would probably be between either The Matrix or Braveheart.
Favorite book?
Favorite book? Nonfiction would be a book called Work Clean. But probably the other than that is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Okay, I think we need to wrap this up with your action items. So what is it that you need to work on in the next couple of months? And for our audience out there, is there anything we could help you with, or anything you need to like tell our audience?
Well, I would say right now, yes, I think I've definitely been getting some momentum and traction in the past few weeks for my business. Like I've definitely been having a lot more sales calls, a lot more interactions with potential students. I would say probably the thing I need to work on next is finishing my course, like actually kind of building out the infrastructure for it. So I can, my vision is to turn it into a full-on comprehensive online course that doesn't need me involved in the process.
Okay.
So I would say right now the thing I just need help with is finding more students.
Okay, so I guess if we have potential students, I guess what I can do is, or what we can do is put the link in our description below so that they can actually contact you directly, or if you have a website, we will also put that.
Yeah, so right now I don't have a website, but the main, I guess you could say my main portal for where I'm running my business is my Facebook. I do live streams almost every single day. I'm constantly talking about whether it be actual Chinese little mini lessons or things you need to consider if you're thinking about learning Chinese. So I have a ton of content there, and all my my calendar booking links are there if you're interested in talking about getting started.
In fact, before we close, I've been learning Chinese for free because of the live, Facebook live that you do on a daily basis. So basically, I just take that as my free lessons from you. So yeah, thank you for that.
My pleasure.
That's all the time we have, but we will have more of you in the future. So
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.